After losing custody of her son, she didn't fight. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She packed a single bag and disappeared into a forgotten mountain cabin her father left behind. Everyone thought she was running away, but what she found inside that cabin, hidden beneath old floorboards and locked away in silence, would change everything. Before we begin, if you believe that losing custody doesn't mean losing your strength, subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. There's a certain kind of silence you only find in the mountains. Not the peaceful kind people pay for on vacation. I mean the heavy kind. The kind that presses against your chest and makes you hear your own regrets a little too clearly. Scarlett Dawson discovered that kind of silence the week she lost custody of her son. The judge's words had been clinical, almost gentle, temporary guardianship awarded to the father. But there was nothing gentle about the way her knees nearly gave out in that courtroom. Nothing gentle about watching her 6-year-old, Lucas, look back at her with confusion as he was let out. 3 days later, Scarlett packed a single duffel bag and drove north. 6 hours into the Appalachian Mountains. No hotels, no phone calls returned, no forwarding address. Just an old cabin her father had left her years ago, something she'd never bothered to visit while he was alive. The gravel road up the mountain hadn't changed, still uneven, still stubborn, much like him. When she finally stepped out of the car, cold air stung her lungs. Pine trees stood tall around the cabin, their shadows long in the fading afternoon light. The place looked smaller than she remembered, lonelier, and somehow waiting. Scarlett rested her hand on the porch railing, its wood rough beneath her fingers. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered into the stillness. The mountains didn't answer, but they listened. That first night in the cabin, Scarlett didn't bother unpacking. She just sat there, on the edge of a wooden chair by the stone fireplace her father had built with his own hands 40 years ago. The same fireplace he used to swear would outlast every bad winter the mountains could throw at it. The cabin smelled like cedar, dust, and something older, something like memory. She found a box of matches in the kitchen drawer and knelt in front of the hearth. Her hands trembled as she stacked kindling, not from the cold, but from everything she'd been holding in. When the fire finally caught, it crackled low and steady, filling the room with a warm, flickering glow. That's when the silence got louder. No cartoons playing in the background, no small socks kicked under the couch, no voice asking, "Mom, can I have one more story?" Scarlett closed her eyes. She could still see Lucas standing in the courthouse hallway, clutching the sleeve of his father's jacket. "Am I in trouble?" he had whispered. She had swallowed the scream rising in her throat. No, baby, not at all. But she had been the one on trial. The judge called it instability, said moving between jobs the past year showed lack of structure. Her ex-husband's attorney called it unpredictable behavior. Scarlett called it survival. After the divorce, she'd taken whatever work she could find. Waitressing, freelance editing, overnight shifts at a nursing home, anything that kept the lights on. But in a courtroom, effort doesn't always look like stability. Sometimes it just looks like chaos. The fire popped sharply, pulling her back to the present. She stood and wandered the small living room. The furniture hadn't moved in decades. A plaid sofa, a bookshelf warped from humidity, a hunting rifle mounted above the mantel. Her father's presence lingered here, even though he'd been gone 5 years. They hadn't been close. He was a quiet man, hard hands, few words, the kind of father who showed love by fixing your car instead of saying he was proud of you. When she'd told him about the divorce, he'd simply nodded and said, "Mountains don't move for storms. Remember that." At the time, she'd rolled her eyes. Now she wasn't so sure. Scarlett drifted toward the back of the cabin, down the narrow hallway to her old bedroom. The door creaked as she pushed it open. It was exactly how she'd left it at 17. Faded horse posters on the wall, a dent in the dresser from when she'd slammed it during a teenage argument. The quilt her grandmother made folded neatly at the foot of the bed. She ran her fingers over it. For the first time since the custody hearing, the tears came without warning. Not polite tears, not the quiet kind you wipe away quickly. These were the kind that bend you forward and steal your breath. "I failed him," she whispered into the empty room. Her voice sounded small against the wooden walls. She slid down to sit on the floor, back against the bed frame, knees pulled to her chest like a child. The mountains outside were silent witnesses. After a long while, when her breathing finally steadied, something caught her eye. A loose floorboard near the closet. Scarlett frowned. She didn't remember that being there. She crawled closer, pressing her palm against the wood. It shifted slightly under her weight. Her father had never been careless with repairs. Curiosity stirred beneath her grief. She fetched a butter knife from the kitchen and carefully wedged it between the boards. After a few tries, the plank lifted just enough for her fingers to hook underneath. With a slow pull, it came free. Beneath it was a narrow cavity, and inside, a metal tin. Scarlett stared at it for a long moment, her pulse quickening. It wasn't large, just an old ammunition box, the kind her father used to keep spare bolts in. But this one was cleaner, intentionally placed. Her breath caught. "Dad, what did you hide?" She carried the tin back to the living room and set it on the coffee table in front of the fire. The flames danced across its scratched surface. Her hands hovered over the latch. For a second, she hesitated. It felt almost sacred, like opening something that had been waiting specifically for this moment. Specifically for her. The latch clicked open with a soft metallic snap. Inside were neatly stacked envelopes, yellowed at the edges but carefully sealed. On top of them lay a small leather-bound notebook. Scarlett reached for the notebook first. Her father's handwriting filled the first page. Not the gruff grocery lists she remembered from the fridge. This writing was steady, deliberate. "If you're reading this, Scarlett, it means life knocked you down hard enough to send you back to the mountain." Her breath left her in a quiet rush. The fire crackled. Outside, wind brushed against the cabin walls like a long exhale. Scarlett swallowed and continued reading. "I always knew this place would be here when you needed it. What I didn't know was how much you'd have to lose before you came home." Her vision blurred. She hadn't told anyone about losing custody yet, not even the few friends she still had. But somehow, it felt like her father knew, and for the first time since the judge's gavel struck wood, Scarlett felt something shift inside her. Not hope, not yet, but something close. A flicker, like the beginning of a fire. The fire had burned lower by the time Scarlett gathered the courage to open the first envelope. Her father had never been a man of letters. He believed in work, in silence, in showing up, not in pouring feelings onto paper. And yet here they were, stacked carefully, dated. The top one was from 2 years ago. Scarlett's fingers trembled as she slid it open. "Scarlett, I saw Lucas today." Her heart stopped. She read the line again. "I saw Lucas today." The room felt smaller somehow, like the walls had leaned in to listen. She hadn't brought Lucas here. Not once. Not after her father's health declined. Not after the arguments about her marriage. Not after the quiet resentment that grew between them. Scarlett kept reading. "You didn't know I was there. I didn't want to interfere. But your ex brought him to the county fair last summer. I happened to be in town for supplies." Her throat tightened. She remembered that fair. The Ferris wheel. Cotton candy sticky on Lucas's fingers. Her ex insisting on family appearances for the sake of his business reputation. "Lucas has your eyes." The letter continued. "Same way they light up when he laughs. He asked his father if he could ride the ponies twice. Reminded me of someone I used to know." Scarlett pressed her hand over her mouth. Her father had been there, watching, from a distance. "I didn't come over because I didn't know if I still had the right. You've made it clear this mountain isn't part of your life anymore, but I want you to know something. I've been setting money aside, not much, just enough to make sure if things ever went sideways, you'd have options." Scarlett's breath hitched. Options. She looked down at the metal tin, at the remaining envelopes beneath. Her heart pounded harder now, not with grief, but with dawning realization. She grabbed the next letter. This one was dated 8 months ago. "I don't trust the way your husband talks about control." It began bluntly. "I've seen that look before in men who think they own more than they do." Scarlett's pulse roared in her ears. Her father had never liked him. She'd called it stubbornness. Old-fashioned thinking. "If you ever need help..." The letter continued. "There's a safety deposit box in your name at First County Bank. The key is taped inside the back cover of this notebook. Don't argue with me about pride. Pride doesn't keep roofs overhead." Scarlett dropped the letter into her lap. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She flipped open the notebook, fingers searching along the inside cover. And there it was, a small brass key, taped carefully in place. Her father hadn't just been watching. He had been preparing. The next envelope was thicker. She opened it slowly. Inside was a copy of a notarized statement. Her father had documented every concerning interaction he'd witnessed between Scarlett and her ex-husband over the years. Raised voices, financial control, the time he'd overheard him threaten to take Lucas away if she didn't get it together. There were dates, descriptions, even a signed affidavit from an old neighbor who'd once intervened during a particularly heated argument. Scarlett's hands shook so badly she had to place the papers on the coffee table. She remembered that night. The shouting! Lucas crying in his bedroom. She had convinced herself it wasn't that bad. That every marriage had storms. Her father hadn't seen storms. He had seen warning signs, and he had quietly built a defense. Tears streamed down Scarlett's face now. But they felt different. Not helpless. Not broken. Fierce! She reached for the final envelope. This one wasn't sealed. Just folded once. "Scarlett, if you're reading all of this..." Then something happened. "And I'm not here to stand in the doorway like I should have more often when you were young." Her vision blurred. "I wasn't the easiest father. I know that. I mistook silence for strength. Thought giving you space meant giving you freedom. But if there's one thing I learned too late, it's this strength isn't about standing alone. It's about knowing when to lean on what's been built for you." The fire crackled louder, as if punctuating the words. "That cabin isn't an escape. It's a foundation, and you are not unstable. You are resilient. There's a difference." Scarlett's shoulders began to shake. No judge had said that word. Resilient. They had used phrases like inconsistent employment and questionable environment. But here, in her father's careful handwriting, was something entirely different. A man who had watched her struggle and hadn't mistaken it for weakness. The wind outside picked up, brushing snow against the windows in soft whispers. Scarlett rose slowly and walked to the door. She stepped onto the porch, cold air biting at her cheeks. The mountains stretched endlessly before her, dark and steady beneath a rising moon. For the first time since losing custody, her thoughts weren't spiraling in shame. They were organizing, forming. Her father had left more than letters. He had left evidence, resources, protection, and something even more powerful, belief. She pressed the papers against her chest and whispered into the night. "I'm not done." The mountains, ancient and unmoved, stood tall around her. And this time, they didn't just listen. They seemed to agree. The next morning, Scarlett woke before sunrise. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the scent of wood smoke reached her, and the memory of the letters came rushing back, not like a blow this time, but like a steady hand on her shoulder. She wrapped herself in her father's old flannel jacket and stepped outside. The mountains at dawn look different than they do at night. Less intimidating, more honest, A thin layer of frost covered the porch railing. The sky was pale blue, the sun just beginning to stretch across the peaks. The world didn't look broken. It just looked still. Scarlett stood there for a long time. In the city, mornings had always been chaos. Alarm clocks, rushed breakfasts, checking emails, worrying about money, about lawyers, about being judged in rooms where people wore suits and spoke in measured tones. But here, there was only breath, only the sound of wind moving through pine needles, and something else, something unfamiliar. Clarity. She had spent months believing she'd failed, believing the narrative handed to her in that courtroom. Unstable, emotional, unprepared. But last night, as she read her father's words by firelight, something shifted. She remembered the nights she stayed up balancing bills after Lucas fell asleep. The way she learned how to patch drywall by watching YouTube tutorials because she couldn't afford a handyman. The birthday cakes baked at midnight after double shifts. That wasn't instability. That was endurance. Scarlett walked down the path behind the cabin, boots crunching against frozen leaves. The woods were quiet, but not empty. Birds stirred overhead. A deer darted between trees in the distance. The mountain didn't apologize for its scars. It wore them openly fallen branches, weathered rock, roots exposed where storms had carved the soil away. And yet it stood, unmoved. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Mountains don't move for storms. For the first time, she understood what he meant. Strength wasn't about avoiding the storm. It was about remaining when it passed. Scarlett stopped at a clearing where she used to sit as a teenager, dreaming about leaving this place behind. She had once believed success meant distance from this cabin, from her father's quiet world, from anything that felt small town and simple. But sitting there now, she realized something else. Distance hadn't made her stronger. Roots had... She pulled her phone from her coat pocket. For days, she had ignored it, let calls go to voicemail, let texts pile up unanswered. Now she opened it. Her ex-husband's last message glared back at her. You need to accept reality. Stability matters. Scarlett stared at the words. Stability. What did that even mean? A bigger house. A cleaner resume. A life curated to impress a judge. Or did it mean something deeper? Consistency of love, consistency of showing up, consistency of trying again, even when you fall. Her father had quietly prepared a safety net, not to rescue her from consequences, but to give her footing. Scarlett turned and looked back at the cabin. Smoke rose gently from the chimney. The windows caught the morning light, reflecting gold. It didn't look abandoned anymore. It looked alive, and something in her chest felt steadier. She walked back inside and spread the documents across the kitchen table. Affidavits, notes, the bank key. This wasn't just emotional comfort. It was tangible. Evidence, resources, tools. For months, she had approached the custody battle defensively, reacting to accusations, scrambling to prove herself worthy. Now, she saw something different. She wasn't begging for her son back. She was building a case. There's a difference. Scarlett made a pot of coffee and sat down with a notebook. For the first time, she didn't write from panic. She wrote from purpose. Call attorney in Asheville. Access safety deposit box. Gather work references. Request financial records from joint accounts. Each line felt like laying a brick. Solid, intentional. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows slightly. But the cabin didn't shake. Neither did she. Hours later, when her lawyer finally answered her call, Scarlett's voice sounded different, calmer. Grounded. I'd like to file for modification, she said steadily. And I have documentation we didn't present before. There was a pause on the other end. That could change things, the lawyer admitted. After hanging up, Scarlett sat quietly. She wasn't naive. This wouldn't be easy. There would be hearings, arguments, more scrutiny, but something fundamental had changed. She no longer saw herself as the woman who lost custody. She saw herself as the mother who was fighting wisely. There's power in that shift. As evening fell, Scarlett lit the fireplace again. But this time, the fire felt different. Not desperate, not lonely, intentional. She picked up her father's notebook and ran her thumb along its worn edges. "You were right," she whispered softly. "Not about everything, but about this." The mountain didn't beg to be understood. It simply stood. And for the first time in a long while, so did she. It started with a phone call Scarlett almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar in Asheville area code. She stared at it while standing at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing years of neglect off the cabin windows. For a second, fear whispered. Bad news travels first. But something steadier inside her said, "Answer it." Scarlett Dawson, a woman's voice asked. "Yes. This is Margaret Hale from First County Bank. I'm calling regarding the safety deposit box registered in your name." Scarlett's hand tightened around the phone. I'll be there this afternoon." The bank sat at the edge of a small downtown strip that hadn't changed much in decades. Same brick buildings, same faded awnings, same barber shop her father used to drag her to when she was little. Inside, everything smelled faintly of paper and polish. Margaret was older, silver hair pinned neatly back, glasses resting low on her nose. She looked at Scarlett with something almost like recognition. "Your father was a good man," she said quietly while leading her to the vault. Scarlett swallowed. "He didn't always know how to say things," she replied softly. Margaret smiled knowingly. Some men build instead of speak. The vault door closed behind them with a heavy metallic hum. Scarlett held the brass key in her trembling fingers and approached the small metal box labeled with her name. It felt surreal, like stepping into a version of her life she never knew was being prepared. The key turned smoothly. Inside the box were 3 items: a thick envelope, a flash drive, and a cashier's check. Scarlett blinked. The check wasn't enormous, but it wasn't small either. Enough to cover legal fees, enough to stabilize several months of expenses, enough to breathe. Her knees weakened slightly. He'd been working extra shifts at the hardware store near the end. She remembered that now. She had assumed it was stubborn pride, refusing to slow down after retirement. It hadn't been pride. It had been preparation. Scarlett opened the envelope next. Inside were copies of financial records, joint account withdrawals her ex-husband had made during their marriage funds Scarlett had never known existed. There were handwritten notes in her father's careful script beside certain entries. Notice pattern here. Transferred to personal account. Question timing before custody filing. Scarlett's pulse quickened. Her father hadn't just been watching emotionally. He had been watching strategically. She turned to Margaret, who stood respectfully at a distance. "Did he say anything when he set this up?" Margaret nodded slowly. "He said storms don't scare him, but the ones that come wearing suits and carrying paperwork, those are the dangerous kind." Scarlett felt something fierce rise in her chest. For months, she had felt small in rooms full of polished professionals, but her father, quiet, mountain-born, hands always rough with work, had understood something essential. Paper trails matter. Documentation matters. Truth matters. Back at the cabin that evening, Scarlett spread everything across the kitchen table again. But this time, the pile looked different. It wasn't desperation. It was leverage. She plugged in the flash drive. A folder opened. Inside were scanned images, text messages, voicemails, financial statements. Her father had gathered them quietly over time, never confronting her, never judging her choices, just building protection. At the bottom of the folder was a video file. Scarlett hesitated. Then she clicked it. The screen flickered to life. Her father sat at the cabin's kitchen table, camera slightly crooked, clearly unfamiliar with technology. He cleared his throat. If you're watching this, Scarlett, then I'm not there to say it face to face. Her breath caught. I know you think you have to fight alone. You've always been that way. Got it from your mother. He paused, eyes softer than she remembered. But strength doesn't mean isolation. It means using what's available to you. He leaned closer to the camera. Don't let anyone convince you that surviving hard seasons makes you unstable. It makes you experienced. Scarlett pressed her hand against her mouth. You are a good mother. I've seen it. And if someone tries to take that from you using technicalities and paperwork, you use the same tools back. The video ended abruptly. No dramatic goodbye. No music? Just truth. The next morning, Scarlett called her attorney again. This time, she didn't sound uncertain. I have financial discrepancies and documented patterns of coercive behavior, she said clearly. We need to amend the filing. There was a pause. That changes the landscape significantly, her lawyer admitted. Scarlett hung up and stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. For the first time since the courthouse hallway, she didn't feel like she was chasing something slipping through her fingers. She felt grounded, supported, backed by something deeper than argument. The cabin behind her no longer felt like an escape. It felt like headquarters, a place where strategy was born, where storms were studied, not feared. She closed her eyes and imagined Lucas's face. The way he used to fall asleep mid-sentence while she read to him. The way he believed she could fix anything. I'm coming back stronger, she whispered into the mountain air. And this time, it wasn't a plea. It was a promise. Growth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up disguised as another storm. 3 days after Scarlett filed the amended motion, the sky over the mountains turned the color of bruised steel. The radio warned of heavy winds moving through the region unexpected for that time of year. Scarlett barely noticed at first. She was seated at the kitchen table, reviewing documents with a focus she hadn't felt in years. Highlighter in hand, notes organized, timeline rebuilt with precision. She wasn't scrambling anymore. She was deliberate. The first gust of wind rattled the windows hard enough to make her look up. The second one knocked a loose shutter against the side of the cabin. Then the power flickered. Scarlett stood slowly, not in panic, in awareness. Storms didn't scare her anymore, but she respected them. She moved methodically, secured the loose shutter, brought in the firewood, checked the latch on the back door. As rain began lashing sideways against the windows, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a split second, her old instinct whispered, ignore it. But this wasn't the old Scarlett. She answered, Ms. Dawson? Yes. This is Deputy Collins from Buncombe County. I'm calling regarding a welfare concern filed by your ex-husband. Her stomach tightened, but her voice stayed even. What kind of concern? He's claiming you've relocated Lucas to an isolated property without notifying the court. Scarlett almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. He's not here, she replied calmly. I haven't had visitation since the ruling. A pause. Yes, ma'am, we confirmed that. Just procedure. Procedure. The same word that once made her feel powerless now sounded different. Now it sounded manageable. After the call ended, Scarlett stared at her reflection in the darkened window. Her ex wasn't just fighting for custody. He was trying to control the narrative. Paint her as reckless, unstable, dangerous. But he didn't know about the financial records. He didn't know about the affidavits. And he certainly didn't know she was no longer fighting from fear. The wind howled louder. A crack echoed from the backyard. Scarlett grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. A tree limb had snapped under the force of the storm, blocking part of the narrow driveway. For a moment, she stood there in the rain, soaked and staring at it. Old Scarlett would have seen that fallen limb as proof. Proof that she couldn't handle this place alone. Proof that the judge had been right. But something inside her had changed. She walked back inside, grabbed her father's old chainsaw from the shed, and returned to the driveway. Rain stung her face. The engine roared to life beneath her grip. She wasn't graceful. She wasn't polished. But she was capable. Piece by piece, she cut through the limb until the path was clear. By the time she shut off the saw, breath coming hard, rain plastering her hair to her face. She wasn't shaking. She was steady. That's when headlights appeared at the end of the drive. Scarlett froze. A sheriff's vehicle? Her heart pounded once hard. But she didn't run inside. She didn't hide. She stood there, mud on her boots, chainsaw still warm in her hand. Deputy Collins stepped out. "Tough night," he said, glancing at the cleared driveway. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment. "You handle that yourself?" "I did." There was something unspoken in his expression. Not suspicion. Respect. "We had to follow up on the welfare call," he explained. "But between you and me, I've seen unstable. This isn't it." Scarlett swallowed hard. 3 words. This isn't it. Validation she hadn't realized she still needed. As the patrol car disappeared down the mountain road, Scarlett stood in the rain for a long moment. The storm began to ease. Clouds broke apart slowly, revealing a sliver of moonlight. She walked back inside and stripped off her wet jacket, tossing it over a chair. The fire was still burning. "Steady!" She sank into the chair by the hearth and let the exhaustion settle into her bones. Not the exhaustion of defeat, the exhaustion of effort. "There's a difference." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her lawyer. "I just received notice." He said, "Your ex filed for emergency modification based on the welfare complaint. It won't hold, but he's escalating." Scarlett closed her eyes briefly. "Good," she replied. Her lawyer paused. "Good. Yes, because now he's reacting." Silence. Then, slowly, "I think you're right." After the call ended, Scarlett stared into the fire. She understood something now that she hadn't before. Her ex had built his case around her instability, but the more pressure he applied, the more she proved she could withstand it. Storm after storm. Not moving. Not breaking. The mountains outside were quiet again. The driveway was clear, and somewhere miles away, her son was sleeping unaware of the shift happening in his mother. Scarlett leaned back and whispered softly, "I'm not running anymore." The fire answered with a low, steady crackle, and for the first time since she lost custody, she didn't just believe she could win, she believed she deserved to. The courtroom felt different the second time. Scarlett noticed it the moment she stepped inside. Same polished floors, same rows of wooden benches, same judge seated high above the room. But she wasn't the same woman who had stood there months ago fighting back tears. This time, she stood steady. Her documents were organized in a leather binder her father once used for tax records. The flash drive rested in her purse. The bank statements, the affidavits, the timeline all carefully prepared. Her ex-husband sat across the aisle, confident as always. But confidence built on control feels different than confidence built on truth, and Scarlett knew the difference now. When the hearing began, her attorney spoke calmly. Financial discrepancies were presented. Patterns of coercion documented. The welfare complaint was exposed for what it was, retaliation. Scarlett didn't interrupt. She didn't argue emotionally. She let the facts speak. And when the judge finally looked up at her and asked, "Miss Dawson, would you like to add anything?" The old Scarlett might have pleaded, might have cried, might have tried to prove her heart in a room that only understood paperwork. But the new Scarlett stood straight. "Yes, Your Honor," she said quietly. She didn't speak about revenge. She didn't attack her ex. She spoke about consistency, about the bedtime routines she'd kept for years, about the school meetings she never missed, about the nights she worked double shifts so her son never felt the weight of adult problems. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She simply told the truth. And sometimes, the truth lands heavier than any performance ever could. There was a long pause after she finished, the kind of silence that stretches and hums. Then the judge leaned back slightly. "This court is amending the custody arrangement," he said evenly. "Primary custody will be restored to Miss Dawson. Visitation terms will be revised accordingly." Scarlett didn't react at first. It was as if her body needed a moment to catch up to her ears. Primary custody. Restored. Her knees didn't buckle this time. They held. She exhaled slowly. Across the aisle. Her ex's expression tightened, but she didn't look at him for long. Her eyes were already searching the back of the courtroom. And there he was. Lucas, sitting beside a court-appointed advocate. When his eyes met hers, they widened. "Mom," he whispered. Barely audible, but she saw it. After paperwork was signed and formalities completed, she knelt in the hallway outside the courtroom. Lucas ran to her. Not cautiously, not confused. Fully. His arms wrapped around her neck so tightly she nearly lost her breath. "I thought you were mad at me," he murmured into her shoulder. Scarlett closed her eyes. "Oh, baby," she whispered. "I was fighting for you." He pulled back just enough to look at her. "Are we going home?" She smiled softly. "Yes," she said. "We are." The drive back up the mountain felt different than the first one. Lucas chattered the entire way about school, about a science project, about a loose tooth he'd been waiting to show her. Scarlett listened. Really listened. The gravel road appeared just as stubborn and uneven as before. But this time, when the cabin came into view, it didn't look lonely. It looked ready. Lucas jumped out of the car before she even turned off the engine. "This is Grandpa's place," he asked. Eyes wide. "It is." He ran toward the porch, boots crunching against gravel. Scarlett followed slowly, letting the moment settle into her bones. Inside, the fire crackled gently. She had prepared it earlier that morning before court, almost as an act of faith. Lucas walked through the living room, touching everything. "Did Grandpa really build this fireplace?" "He did." Lucas looked up at her. "Was he strong?" Scarlett thought about the letters. The hidden savings. The quiet preparation. "Yes," she said softly. "He was." Lucas nodded as if that answered more than just the question. That night, as snow began to fall lightly outside, Scarlett tucked her son into the small bedroom down the hall. The same room she had once slept in. The same quilt lay across the bed. Mom, Lucas asked sleepily. "Yes. Are you going to leave again?" The question pierced her, but she didn't flinch. "No," she said steadily. "I'm not running anymore." He reached for her hand and squeezed it. "Good," he murmured before drifting to sleep. Scarlett stood there for a long moment, watching his chest rise and fall. Then she stepped back into the living room. The firelight flickered against the wooden walls. The mountains outside were still. Steady. Scarlett walked to the porch and looked out into the snow-dusted night. Months ago, she had come here broken, ashamed, convinced she had failed. But what she found in that cabin wasn't just documents or money. She found perspective. She found strategy. She found proof that strength doesn't shout, it prepares. And most importantly, she found herself. The wind moved gently through the trees. Scarlett closed her eyes and whispered into the cold mountain air. "We're home." This time, the mountain didn't just listen. It held them. Scarlett thought she had lost everything the day custody was taken from her. But what she really lost was the illusion that she had to do it all alone. The mountain didn't rescue her. Her father didn't return to fight her battles. Instead, she discovered something more powerful. She had always been capable. The cabin didn't give her strength. It reminded her she already had it. And sometimes, that reminder is enough to change the outcome of your life. Storms will come. People will misjudge you. You may even misjudge yourself. But if your foundation is built on love, effort, and truth, then even when you fall, you are not finished. If this story meant something to you, Subscribe, more powerful, heart-true stories are coming. And if you know someone who still believes in second chances, share this with them. Because sometimes, the moment you choose to stand again, that's what changes everything.